So we're going back on stage again. We're going to be live in the Cork Opera House on March 30th for a very special event, which is going to form part of the Cork Podcast Festival. Our show is called Look Who's Talking. It's going to be all about those criminals. How do we get them into studio? How do we get up close and personal with them? And what have they got to say when the cameras are off? So Cork Opera House, tickets from corkpodcastfestival.ie, 30th of March. See you there.
Just to start this, I'm going to read you the first 3 lines out of the New York Post. An article headlined how snowboarder Ryan Wedding went from Olympian to alleged drug kingpin and murderer on FBI's most wanted list. Yeah. And just because it's so beautifully tabloid still, isn't it?
Okay.
So 2 decades after his career as an Olympic snowboarder, Ryan Wedding is on a different type of downhill dash, skidding straight onto the FBI's most wanted list. Wedding, a 43-year-old Canadian who competed in the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, has since gone off-piste and into a different type of powder, allegedly becoming a cold-blooded transnational drug kingpin with ties to the vicious Sinaloa cartel. Now, Ryan Wedding is wanted. He is being hidden, it is believed, by the Sinaloa cartel at the moment. But he's alleged to have operated this billion-dollar criminal enterprise, moving cocaine between Colombia, Mexico and the US and Canada for a protracted period from about 2010 onwards. He's also responsible for 3 murders, they are alleging. But very interestingly, so this is a huge case in the States, the biggest sort of crime story that's going on there at the moment. But we have links between this guy, yet again, the Sinaloa cartel, and an Irish crime gang.
Yeah, I mean, it is an amazing story. Ryan Wedding, as you said, it's probably like a lot of crime stories don't impact in the US the way they might over here, but this one really has, probably because of his sort of colourful background and the sheer scale of it. I mean, they're talking 60 tons of cocaine a year that he was moving, which if you consider the size of the MV Matthew or one of these, it just shows you the scale of it. So they've charged 16 people in connection with this drug ring. Ryan Wedding is on the run. He's in Sinaloa. They actually have some encrypted messages that they've broken into. But a number of his associates in this gang, and they've put up one of those posters, the same as the Kinahans, where they have his network. And one of those guys is currently in custody. A number of them are in custody. But one of the guys is a guy called Gurpreet Singh is his name. Yeah. He's from Indian background, but he's a Canadian, born and raised in Canada. And he applied for bail last week. And during his bail hearing in Canada, in the Superior Court, which I presume is a high court in Canada, the US government made a submission saying he shouldn't be allowed out on bail. And the reason they gave is that they're saying Ryan Wedding continues to be involved in drug dealing from Sinaloa, and that Gurpreet Singh shouldn't be out because he's one of his most trusted associates. But in that hearing, really interesting, they also said that Singh shouldn't be getting out because of his international connections in Dubai in particular. And they told the court that Singh has an extensive organised crime connections within Dubai, including relationships with members of the Kinahan gang, which is a well-known violent organised crime group operating throughout the world. Incredible. And they said that Wedding continues to be involved in cocaine smuggling while on the run. Investigators are aware that Wedding continues to traffic drugs while in hiding. Wedding should not be granted access to an additional loyalist through the release of Singh on bail. And they also described how Singh was part of an operation sending luxury stolen cars over to Dubai, where he has all these criminal connections. And I think they were suggesting he had been over there. So it's not a casual link, it's a very definitive link.
No, and I think we could probably safely say that members of, this Canadian US cartel, they're buying from Sinaloa. Yeah. Buying cocaine and other substances, clearly meth in particular would be one. Yeah. That they're transporting it from the cocaine from Colombia through Mexico onwards to the US and Canada. What reason would they be in Dubai? It would be to make connections with the European market, which they have been more and more seeing as a growth market.
Yeah, and of course, and they are using the Sinaloa cartel to transport that cocaine. They may be buying it themselves in Colombia. But also what you're seeing is these ties in between Europe and the Sinaloa cartel are growing.
Yeah.
I mean, just last month, there was a major Dutch cocaine trafficker was shot dead in a car park in Sinaloa. And interestingly, like what the Dutch aren't reporting that he was just hiding out. They were saying he was playing an active senior role in this internal feud within the Sinaloa cartel. So these guys, you know, while they are using the Sinaloa cartel and working together, like they're active participants, and those connections are getting tighter and tighter. And then all roads lead back one way or another to Dubai.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we do see.
Let's talk a little bit about the story in general before we sort of go on our tangent of Europe.
Yeah.
And we'll have to bring in Kerry into this, of course.
Of course.
The links between Kerry and the Sinaloa cartel are just extraordinary here.
Yeah.
So Wedding's background is he's a champion snowboarder.
A champion.
Is there not enough money in that?
Well, I don't think there is. Now he's a champion. Like you could say, do you say anybody who's reached the Olympics is a hero and it's an incredible achievement? I suppose you probably do.
I imagine in Canada, snowboarding is something you could make a good living out of.
Well, he came 24th in the parallel giant slalom in the 2002 Salt Lake Olympics, but that's still a huge achievement.
Yeah.
So he was still a very talented athlete. He was obviously on that road.
And that was in 2002, so he was only in his very early 20s then.
He was in his early 20s then. What seems to have happened then is after the Olympics, he kind of quits snowboarding, or certainly wasn't becoming a full-time professional athlete. He signed up for a university course. While in university, he was working as a bouncer. And somewhere along the way, he became involved in marijuana dealing.
Right.
So relatively small scale start. But by 2009, he was heavily involved in the cocaine trafficking business. Now, he was the subject of a kind of a sting operation where he had been selling cocaine, but also laundering the money through these Iranian dissidents, effectively. These Iranian people who were based in Canada. And he'd also had these dealings with these ex-KGB people, which is incredible again, because obviously that's something that's been said about those connections about the Kinahans as well. He ultimately was prosecuted in the US and went to prison for a number of years. At the time, his mother did an interview saying, you know, you can have every opportunity and still take the wrong path. So he went into prison, but he seems to have, while in prison, developed these further criminal connections, as many of these guys do if they go into jail in that period of their lives when he's probably in his late sort of 20s at that point. He seems to have come out and become far, far bigger than he was when he went in. So basically what the cocaine trafficking ring was all about was that the cocaine was being bought, it is believed, by Wedding in Colombia.
Yeah.
He would get it to Mexico. And then he had the Sinaloa cartel who would move it through Mexico into the US for him.
And onwards up to Canada.
Well, yeah, but he was also operating in the US though as a drug dealer in the US, basically in LA. So he ran then, once the Sinaloa cartel got it over the border and delivered to him, he took over the operation then.
Right.
So he was operating these stash houses, a lot of them in LA, and he would then move that cocaine through whatever clients he had in the US and across the border then into Canada. So, you know, somebody said in one of the pieces I read, he's effectively the biggest white drug dealer in the world, in the northern hemisphere of the US. I mean, we hear all the time about these rich major drug dealers in Europe and they have names and faces. You don't really hear the same in the US or in Canada.
They talk about they sort of usually have, you know, backgrounds, links to Mexico. He doesn't. He's from this very wealthy family, actually, of sports people from Thunder Bay, Ontario.
Yeah. And of course, then he had a network of people that came up with him, including a guy called Andrew Clark, a good sort of Irish name, I suppose. who was ultimately arrested in Sinaloa last year, a major operation, and he was picked up there. He'd obviously been hiding out there as well. So these are absolutely the top level of drug dealers operating in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's $1 billion operation is how it's been described as the FBI.
So it brings us on, I suppose, then to those Dubai links. And what you have in Dubai is you have this absolute melting pot of criminals, I suppose, from Australia, Asia, Europe.
Yeah. I mean, we don't even know about these Asian guys, but if you look at it, you see these guys from India, from Pakistan.
Yeah.
It's the exact same scenario. I mean, there's some...
But you have the kingpins of Europe out there in
Yes.
Dubai, where they continue to do their business while their own countries in Europe struggle with creating extradition agreements and all the rest of it. And we look at our own Kinahan operation, and the fact that they're actually named in that bail hearing is extraordinary.
Extraordinary.
It not only shows the levels they have got to, which we know about because they were sanctioned by the US Treasury back in 22, and that they are actually just known now as one of the world global cartels.
One of the world global cartels. And it's interesting, actually, in that Singh bail hearing, you hear about the FBI have a witness talking about these connections with the Kinahans, and it doesn't go into the details, but then later on in the copy it says that witness is now dead.
Right.
So they obviously had somebody in there recording stuff.
Yeah.
I think they have named him in the Canadian papers, a Colombian guy who's been shot dead subsequently. So it's
The fact that he is being protected by the Sinaloa.
Yeah.
He's obviously still worth money to them. He's still worth something to them. He's still running a business. He still has connections and is presumably from his hideout in Sinaloa continuing to sell their drugs.
That's exactly what it said in the court hearing. They're saying he's still huge in business. Obviously still... You see, I suppose the world has changed due to technology.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same as people can work from home. I suppose you can work from Sinaloa if you're in the drugs trafficking business at a certain level.
Yes. Now, I mean, I suppose we don't have any clear links between this story and the story in Kerry, but just to update on that one, I suppose we have recently seen Nathan MacDonald, the businessman from Kerry, be sentenced to 12 years for his role in a plot to transport meth from Kerry through to Australia. So they were using really south of Ireland as a landing point for these drugs. There is a guy before the courts, James Lean, who his sentence hearing, MacDonald's sentence hearing heard was the kind of the upper echelons of this operation. And clearly they're dealing totally with the Gardaí and the courts have heard with the Sinaloa. They're deep in with a sort of a strand of the Sinaloa cartel because of Maurice O'Shea Salazar, who settled in Kerry some years ago along with his mother, the mother being a relative of some sort of Joaquim El Chapo Guzman. But what's interesting really is that idea that Sinaloa, and I mean, we're catching up now.
Yeah.
Because we're finding out about these things because of investigations and because of court cases. And, even in the last year, it would have been unheard of that you could have had Sinaloa representatives in Ireland, let alone in Europe. There had been some kind of reports coming out of the EU, and their reporting system is usually it takes a couple of years to put these reports together. So those reports are a little bit old by the time they're coming. But what they do is warn, what's coming after and what's coming in. And they have been mentioning the Sinaloa, the Mexican cartels have been bedding down in places like Amsterdam, in the south coast of Spain. They've been doing their business. So they're salespeople, really, they have.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were to look at it and compare it to a traditional business structure, I would say that they have a sort of franchises effectively, rather than sending over hitmen from Mexico and big groups of people that are born and raised in Sinaloa, they sort of get this franchise system where they have a couple of people that they can trust to then maybe get, people from Europe or whatever into that organization. I mean, that's how it worked with Maurice José Salazar. He bought the cocaine in conjunction with the Sinaloa. He basically he bought it as part of a discounted buy. He gave the money to the Sinaloa cartel. They bought whatever tons all in one go. Some of that was given to Maurice José Salazar, and he took control of it then from that point in Chile, effectively getting it to Europe. But he was part of that mass buying. Presumably some of that other big purchase went elsewhere. And so they seem to be have their own smuggling operation across the border, but they seem to be happy with this structure where they have these franchise holders effectively.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of this business ultimately seems to be done in Dubai, for obvious reasons, I suppose. I mean, we're going back again, we could talk about the money laundering operation, the Russian money laundering operation busted in the UK. Again, that all the way went back to Dubai because that seems to be where they can clean their money.
It's the centre of the organised crime universe, isn't it?
It is, and the reason is because the controls on the finances there are so loose. They can move money through banks, through other systems. They can buy whatever they need, and they can exchange it. Again, you've heard in recent times in that money laundering operation that the Kinahans again were linked to the Russian money laundering operation. They were describing how a lot of the purchases of the cocaine, the original purchase of the Colombian cartels, was done with cryptocurrency, amazingly.
Yeah.
So that's where it's become the Colombians, of course, back in the Pablo Escobar days, took control of it from root to stem. They produced it, they smuggled it, and then they sold in the US. But now they're just the producers.
Yeah.
They don't seem to bother so much with it after that. But the Sinaloa cartel have become the logistical experts, effectively.
Yeah, the major salespeople.
And amazingly, loads of it seems to tie back to Ireland. I mean, if you were, Ryan Wedding, I was actually just reading that story in town towards the end, and you just see this Kinahan link, and it is just incredible. Because I suppose when it comes down to it, if you were to look at maybe tech companies, I mean, there's only a handful of people at the very top. And maybe that is the same ultimately with the world of cocaine dealing, that there is there's an elite there, and they move between each other, and they
do business together.
They do business together.
Yeah.
They do business together. And if somebody has stuff,
and once they don't kill one another in their centre of operations and their HQ in Dubai, they're pretty much free to do their business there. They feel comfortable. I mean, that they are sending out a salesperson to Dubai to do business with the Kinahans and others. I mean, I'm sure there's other cartels mentioned in that.
Yeah.
It is the centre of everything, isn't it?
It is the centre of everything, and it's because the money.
Yeah.
There's nowhere safer. And Ryan Wedding was added to the FBI's most wanted list last week, and they put a €10 million bounty on his head, and you can see the poster if people want to look at it online.
Yeah.
It's the same as the poster for the.
Yeah.
It's the same as the poster for the Kinahans. It so well now that they have 5 million. I suppose you could say they add up to 15. Ryan has 10 on his head. Personally,
those connections, though, again, are coming closer to. You wonder, is there something for the Kinahan top command in the States?
Well, there has to be. I mean, if this is coming from the US government at a high level, I mean, the names of the attorneys are there, but this is their submission.
Yeah.
Assistant US attorneys Maria Jai and Lindsay Alsop. So that is the submission they make to the Canadian court. And like all these submissions, they've got to be backed up by these intelligence files. And that is one of the things they feel is most prominent to be said against this guy getting bail. I mean, they have to be, they're not there in a sort of casual mentions. I mean, they are obviously a particular focus of the US authorities. Where that all leads, I mean, is a mystery to us. But, it's front
page news in the States, which is really difficult to get a story on the front page, especially one about crime. I'd say the last stories that were in the front pages of those New York newspapers has to have been the Joaquin El Chapo Guzman trial.
Yes, exactly.
Which was an enormous affair in a Brooklyn courthouse. And of course, he has landed in, maximum security prison for the rest of his life. There was all sorts of fascinating bits around that, including his glamorous wife who showed up in the courtroom and went on to become a reality TV star.
Yeah.
Until I think her show was canned. But yeah, look, we'll continue to unravel this because, with the Kinahans there at the table, there's obviously more to find out.
Yeah, and I mean, if you could look at these guys at the very top, you could say the Sinaloa cartel, some sort of Iranian money launderer, some ties with some guys in Russia, and then the Kinahans, and then Dubai, and that's five
golden
teams.
boys.
Yeah, golden boys.
All right, Niall, thank you.
Thanks. Robbie Lawler was out of control.
This is Double Cross, the murder of Robbie Lawler.
It was going to be an all-out war with him in the middle of it.
A Crime World special investigation podcast based on my new book, Web of Betrayal, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.